I still remember the way Marissa smiled the day I met her, like it was the easiest, happiest thing in the world. We were in our mid-20s, both fresh out of university, and brimming with excitement about the future. She wore a pale blue sundress and had her hair in a simple ponytail when she asked if the seat next to me in the bustling coffee shop was free. I said yes, and within minutes, we were talking about everything and nothing, favorite authors, odd jobs we'd worked while studying, and funny stories about our families. There was a natural ease in our conversation, a spark that felt rare. By the time I drained my second cup of coffee, I knew there was something special about her. She laughed in a way that lit up the space around her, and I realized I'd do anything to see that light every day. We started dating soon after, and it was a whirlwind romance in the best possible sense. We went to concerts for bands we'd never heard of, stumbled into hole-in-the-wall restaurants, and took spontaneous road trips that sometimes led nowhere. We found ourselves dancing in empty parking lots because a certain song made one of us feel alive. It was that kind of relationship, vibrant, passionate, all-consuming. When I got my first proper job, she celebrated with me like it was her own victory. And when she finally landed a position in a small firm as a junior marketing associate, I thought we'd conquered the world together. We were unstoppable, or so it seemed. The proposal came on a crisp autumn afternoon. We'd returned to the coffee shop where we first met, the one that smelled of espresso and toasted pastries. My heart pounded harder than it ever had before, but as soon as I saw her walk in, I felt a surge of warmth. I dropped to one knee and asked if she'd marry me. She didn't wait for me to finish the question before she said yes, tears welling in her eyes. We hugged so tightly I thought we might never let go. That night, we called our families, shared the news with friends, and daydreamed about what our wedding would look like, something small, we decided, with just the people who mattered most. We got married in a botanical garden the following summer. It was humid and the sky threatened rain, but the downpour held off just long enough for us to exchange vows under a white gazebo surrounded by hydrangeas. In that moment, when she slipped the ring on my finger and I whispered my promises, I believed nothing could ever shake our bond. The way she looked at me, her eyes shining with tears and hope, seemed to confirm it. We danced under string lights to a slow tune, our bodies swaying in sync, certain we were writing the first chapter of a perfect life. For a while, it did feel perfect. We moved into a little townhouse on a quiet street, painted the walls in vibrant colors that made the space our own, and spent lazy weekends binge-watching old sitcoms, laughing at jokes we'd practically memorized. She'd surprise me with homemade dinners. Pasta dishes with too much garlic or desserts that leaned on the sweet side, and I'd show up with flowers on random Thursdays just to see her smile. Our careers advanced steadily. She climbed the ranks at her marketing job, gaining more responsibilities. I found a niche in project management at a tech startup. We joked about saving up for a bigger house one day, maybe even talk about kids if the time felt right. Life seemed to be unfolding exactly the way we'd hoped. But life has a knack for throwing curveballs when you least expect it. Around our 5th anniversary, I began to notice subtle shifts in her mood, like she was carrying a secret weight. She'd come home later and later from work, apologizing for the overtime. Sometimes, she'd vanish into the den on weekends to answer emails or finalize some campaign plan. I tried not to read too much into it. A career-oriented woman, I told myself, was something I admired. But it did sting a bit when I'd plan a movie night only to hear she needed to revise a presentation for Monday's meeting. Once warm and affectionate, she started giving me quick pecks on the cheek instead of a lingering kiss. She seemed to drift away mentally even when she was right beside me. I tried to rationalize it. Everyone changes as they grow older, and she'd become dedicated, maybe even obsessed, with her job. The marketing world was competitive, and she wanted to make a name for herself. I recalled how she'd once confided in me about her insecurities, how she felt overshadowed by more confident colleagues, and how she was determined to prove her worth. Perhaps these long hours and single-minded focus were just part of that ambition. I pushed away the nagging doubt in my gut, that little voice that wondered if there was more to her late nights and short responses. It took a sharper turn about 6 months later. Marissa started acting anxious whenever her phone buzzed, glancing at it with a nervous flick of her eyes. She never used to lock her phone, but now she used a passcode. Harmless enough, I thought at first, since most people keep their phones locked. But the manner in which she'd hold it, always face down, made me uneasy. Whenever I came near, she'd flip the phone away or minimize the screen. Questions formed on the tip of my tongue, but I found myself reluctant to voice them. I worried I'd sound paranoid or controlling, the type of spouse who checks up on every text. I told myself that trust was integral to any marriage, so I should let her keep her privacy. Our intimacy dwindled. Nights that used to be filled with laughter in bed turned into mechanical goodnights and rolling away under the sheets. I told myself it was just a busy season, that we'd reconnect eventually. Yet, my chest felt hollow each time she turned her back to me, and I found sleep harder to come by. Sometimes I'd slip out into the living room, watch the moonlight on the furniture, and wonder if this was just a normal slump or something darker. I was too afraid to let my thoughts drift to the word affair. It felt inconceivable. She loved me, I'd remind myself. We had a life together, and we'd always been honest with each other, hadn't we? The catalyst for my suspicions came one Sunday afternoon when we were supposed to have lunch with friends. She bailed last minute, claiming a migraine and telling me I should go without her. I did, though I barely paid attention to the conversation at the restaurant. Partway through the meal, I decided to check on her, maybe see if she needed any medicine. Her phone rang and rang with no answer. Concerned, I excused myself early and drove home. The house was silent, her car in the driveway. I called her name, but no response. Fear tightened my chest. Was she in pain, sleeping it off? I climbed the stairs, heart pounding, only to find the bedroom empty. Then I heard the shower running. I relaxed slightly, but something still felt off. Her purse was on the bed, half open, phone nowhere in sight. A sense of disquiet took over me. I knew it was a violation of her privacy, but I found my hands moving on their own, rummaging through the purse. I found her phone wedged between her wallet and some receipts. The screen was locked, but a small detail caught my eye. The battery icon showed it was almost dead. My mind whirled with the memory of how she always kept her phone charged. Why would she let it drop so low? I have a background in tech, and a half-formed, dangerous idea took hold. I recalled certain data recovery tools that can resurrect deleted messages or phone logs, even if they've been trashed. It wasn't foolproof, but if my wife was truly hiding something, there might be a digital trail. My hands shook as I pulled out my own phone, opening an app I'd once used for a side project. If I could connect my phone to hers, maybe I could recover something. My heart hammered, the weight of betrayal swirling. Was I betraying her by snooping, or was she already betraying me in ways I couldn't fathom? I heard the shower shut off and realized I had seconds. My phone managed to establish a brief connection before her phone died completely. It was enough time for me to hit a restore command on recently deleted messages, copying them over to a secure folder on my device. Then I heard footsteps on the bathroom tile. I stuffed her phone back into her purse, face burning with guilt, and rushed out of the bedroom, pretending to search for something in the closet. She walked in, hair damp, a towel wrapped around her, eyes widening slightly when she saw me. I mumbled something about looking for a jacket and quickly left the room, my heart rattling like a drum. She gave me a puzzled look but said nothing. That night, my stomach churned with anticipation. Once she drifted off to sleep, I slipped out of bed and headed to my office. My phone was locked in a drawer, the recovered messages waiting for me. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the device. What I saw made my heart drop to my knees. There were texts from a number not saved in her contacts, though the conversation made it abundantly clear who it might be: a colleague from her firm, a man I'd met only a couple of times at work events, Thomas. The messages were explicit in places, flirtatious in others, and heartbreakingly intimate. They spoke of nights spent together, longing for each other's touch, secret jokes that referenced, inside, experiences I knew nothing about. It was clear they'd gone from emotional closeness to a full-blown physical affair. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. The room felt claustrophobic, the air thick with betrayal. I scrolled through messages that spanned weeks, if not months. How had I missed this? A wave of nausea hit me. The texts referenced times I'd believed her to be at the office late, or dealing with a migraine, or heading off to a weekend conference. They'd joke about me, albeit indirectly, discussing how to avoid detection. One particularly painful message said, "He's so clueless, I almost feel bad." My eyes burned with tears. The woman I loved, the one who'd once seemed to share every bit of her soul with me, was mocking my ignorance with another man. My throat clenched, and a fury built within me that I'd never known. Several times, I had to stop reading, my mind spinning. Part of me wanted to storm into the bedroom and confront her right then. But I was also drowning in sorrow, needing more details to piece together just how far this had gone. I searched further, seeing references to hotel bookings, hush-hush lunches, and the last time they'd enjoyed each other's company. My breath caught in my chest. They'd even planned future rendezvous. My gut twisted to think about how I'd possibly been in the same room with Thomas before, shaking his hand, unaware that he was the man who'd been stealing my wife's heart and body. I spent hours locked in my office, rereading the messages, perhaps hoping they'd change or reveal some small hint that it was all a misunderstanding. But the conversation was undeniable. She had chosen him over and over, each text dripping with the excitement of secrecy. By the time dawn lightened the edges of the sky, I felt like a husk of myself, exhausted, angry, and heartbroken. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the darkened window, noticing the lines of sorrow etched into my face. That morning, she got up, kissed me softly on the forehead, and dressed for work, unaware that I knew everything. My mind whirled with how best to confront her. Should I wait until she was home? Should I show up at her office and corner them both? My raw emotions wrestled with practicality. When she left with a smile and a half-hearted excuse about a busy day, it took everything in me not to lash out. Instead, I waited for her car to disappear down the street, then picked up my phone. I needed advice, but I couldn't bear to face close friends yet. I was too ashamed to admit how blindsided I'd been. I scrolled aimlessly, eventually deciding to call my older sister, Elena. Elena lived in another state, but we were close. She listened quietly as I spilled the details, my voice cracking. She asked calm, pointed questions. "Do you have proof? How do you feel you should handle it?" Her steadiness helped anchor me. She suggested I think carefully about whether I wanted to save the marriage or end it. Only then could I decide how to confront Marissa. The notion of losing her entirely made my chest ache, but the betrayal was deep. I thanked Elena for listening, promising I'd update her soon. The day dragged on. I tried to work, but my concentration was shot. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words from those messages. I pictured them together, replaying each reference to hotel rooms or stolen kisses. When I pictured her face, it was no longer soft with love, but twisted with guilt. When the clock hit 5, I realized I had to take some kind of action. Waiting in agony was only making me unravel further. I decided to confront her that evening, but not until I had physical evidence. I knew she might try to spin it, deny it, or claim it was innocent. I needed a plan that would leave no room for evasion. So I compiled the incriminating screenshots into a folder, along with date stamps and references that correlated to her fake explanations about migraines or conferences. I emailed them to myself, then stored them on a USB drive. By the time I was done, I felt sick, like I was cataloging each blow to my heart. She came home a bit after 7, looking surprisingly buoyant, a small takeout bag in hand. "I got us some Thai food," she announced, setting it on the kitchen counter. I marveled at how normal she could act, how expertly she'd hidden her betrayal. As we settled at the table, I studied her face. She seemed tired, maybe a bit edgy, but not ridden with guilt, or at least not enough for me to see. We made small talk about our days, the conversation forced on my end. The smell of curry turned my stomach. After dinner, I asked if we could talk. She noticed my serious tone and grew wary. "Is something wrong?" she asked, forcing a smile. My heart pounded. I led her to the living room, took a seat on the couch, and told her to sit. The tension between us was palpable. She swallowed hard, setting aside her phone. I began slowly, telling her I'd noticed changes in her behavior. She fidgeted, looking anywhere but my eyes. Then I said I knew about her affair with Thomas, that I had proof. Her jaw dropped, color draining from her face, and she immediately tried to deny it. I interrupted by holding up my phone, tapping open the folder of restored messages. She stared at the screen in horror, eyes flicking between the texts and my face. Her hands shook. At first, she tried to claim it was just flirtation, nothing physical. But I referenced explicit lines from the texts about hotels and intimacy. She bit her lip so hard it drew blood. Realizing the jig was up, her posture crumpled. Tears formed in her eyes. She tried to say she never intended for it to go this far, that it started as a harmless friendship, blossomed into flirtation, and then turned into something she couldn't control. "I was lonely, I felt like we were drifting," she sobbed, hands clenched. "He made me feel wanted again." A wave of anger rushed through me. "What about me?" I demanded, voice trembling. "I was here the entire time, trying to reach out, trying to show you I cared. You shut me out." She sobbed harder, repeating that she was sorry, that she'd made a terrible mistake. But I wasn't ready for apologies. A huge part of me wanted her to suffer as I had. I told her how humiliating it was to read those messages, how every lie she told felt like a knife in my back. She cried more, but my sympathy was drowned by the memory of her typed words. "He's so clueless, I almost feel bad." I confronted her with that specific line, and she paled, unable to explain. Eventually, I asked the question burning in my chest, "Do you love him?" She froze, tears slipping down her cheeks. I asked again, louder this time, and she shook her head. "No, I don't love him," she whispered. I was just enamored by the excitement. It was a rush of something new, and I was stupid enough to chase it. Her voice broke. I studied her face, trying to see if I could detect any truth. My heart hammered, torn between wanting to believe her and being repulsed by the betrayal. The house felt cold, like the walls themselves had turned against us. Over the next few hours, we argued, shouted, then lapsed into tearful silences. She insisted she'd break it off immediately, that she wanted to fix things. But my own emotions were in free fall. Could I forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? By midnight, she was huddled on the couch, face buried in her arms, while I paced the room, anger still simmering. When she reached out a hand, I recoiled. Even though I ached to hold her, the memory of those messages made it impossible. We talked in circles about what went wrong. She blamed her growing dissatisfaction, the feeling that we'd lost our spark. I countered that she never talked to me, never gave me a chance to address the problem. She blamed the stress of her job, the pressure to succeed, the sense that I was always fine without her. I told her that if she'd told me how she felt, I would have done anything to help. Her tears came anew, and she apologized again and again, but it didn't erase the images locked in my mind. By the time the sun rose, we were emotionally spent. She tried to come near, but I flinched. I slept in the guest room, or rather, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while her muffled sobs drifted through the walls. In the aftermath, we stumbled through days that felt surreal. She texted Thomas, at least so she claimed, to end things, and she swore on everything she cared about that it was over. I asked for proof. She showed me a terse message telling him she couldn't see him anymore, that it was wrong, and to never contact her again. He replied with confusion and frustration, but she blocked him. I was left with the question, did I believe she was truly done? And even if she was, could I handle living with the memory? Our families noticed the tension. My mother asked if we were okay, her father wondered why she seemed so subdued. We brushed off concerns with vague mentions of stress, but the truth weighed heavily. I confided in my sister again, who encouraged me to consider therapy, individually and as a couple, if we wanted any chance of salvaging the marriage. My wife suggested the same, tears shining in her eyes, desperation in her voice. Part of me was too angry to agree, but I also couldn't bear the idea of walking away without at least trying. We set up an appointment with a marriage counselor. The sessions were brutal, with the counselor gently but relentlessly pressing us to confront the betrayal and the underlying issues. Marissa spoke about feeling invisible in our marriage, about how she believed I'd stopped truly seeing her. She confessed she reveled in Thomas's admiration because it made her feel alive again. I lashed out, telling her she should have come to me, not him, and that her behavior was cowardly and cruel. The counselor tried to guide us toward honest communication without blame, but the pain was too fresh for me to hold back. Sometimes, I left those sessions feeling more wounded than when I walked in. Yet, slowly, something began to shift. Marissa took steps to rebuild trust. She let me see her phone anytime I asked, she shared her location when she went out, and she even distanced herself from certain colleagues who were close to Thomas. It was an extreme measure, and I was torn between relief that she was cutting ties and guilt that we'd arrived at a point where such vigilance was even necessary. She apologized every day, not just with words but with actions, being more present at home, taking the initiative to plan dates, or simply sitting beside me on the couch and asking how I felt. I'd like to say it was smooth sailing, but the truth was far from that. I'd get hit with waves of anger or sadness without warning. I'd see a commercial for a romantic getaway and think of their hotel meetings, or I'd hear her phone buzz and my stomach would clench. Nighttime was the worst, lying in bed next to her, remembering that there had been times she'd left me for someone else's arms. On those nights, I'd slip out of bed and stand at the window, wondering if I could ever truly let go of the resentment. Therapy helped me articulate these feelings, and Marissa listened intently, tears on her cheeks whenever I detailed how her betrayal haunted me. Weeks became months. The counselor guided us to explore what our relationship had been missing. We unearthed painful truths. I'd allowed my own work stress to consume me, forgetting to nurture our bond. She'd been harboring insecurities for years, never voicing them until it was too late. It didn't justify her affair, and I told her so, but it helped me understand how a series of small cracks can widen into a chasm if left unaddressed. We worked on communication exercises, forcing ourselves to share vulnerabilities we once held in secret. I discovered that she still loved me, sincerely, but had gotten lost chasing excitement instead of confronting the monotony she felt at home. She discovered that I did love her, too, even though my focus on responsibilities sometimes overshadowed my affection. There were setbacks. One day, I found an old email from Thomas that she hadn't deleted, and it sent me into a spiral of rage. She claimed it was an oversight, that she'd blocked him everywhere else and simply hadn't realized that email was still buried in her account. We argued violently that night, both of us drained by the constant push and pull of rebuilding trust. But with the counselor's help, we talked it out the next day, each explaining our perspective. She showed me, step by step, how she blocked him on every platform, making it clear she had no intention of speaking to him again. I didn't fully calm down for days, though, the wound raw as ever. Eventually, we got to a point where life felt livable again. I can't say I forgave her fully at that stage, because betrayal on that scale doesn't just vanish. But I saw her commitment to change, and I recognized my own desire to hold on to the woman I married, flawed as she might be. She tried to make amends, and I tried to open my heart to the possibility of healing. Our counselor said that trust might take years to fully restore, and even then, we'd bear the scars. The question was whether we wanted to wear those scars together or part ways and start over separately. Through all this, I kept thinking back to the night I discovered her messages, how it felt like my entire world had collapsed. For a while, I blamed myself for even looking. If I'd remained ignorant, maybe I'd have avoided the pain. But deep down, I knew the ignorance would have been a false peace. No marriage can thrive on secrets that large. As we worked through therapy, she admitted she might have continued the affair much longer if I hadn't found out. The knowledge both pained and relieved me. It meant that, in a twisted way, my discovery was the jolt she needed to confront the damage she was causing. We started sharing more about our days again, reminiscent of how we used to back in the coffee shop days. I asked her about her projects at work, and she asked me about mine. We scheduled date nights, this time ensuring they weren't just routine dinners but real attempts at reconnecting. Like going to a local improv show or hiking in the nearby hills. We set boundaries around phone use, especially during evenings, forcing each other to be present in the moment. Over time, laughter started to seep back in, albeit hesitantly. We'd find ourselves reminiscing about silly memories from our early romance. Sometimes that would lead us to tears, because we realized how far we'd strayed. But other times, it led to a genuine sense of hope. Little by little, I found that I could look at her without immediately recalling the texts, though it was never entirely erased. She, for her part, seemed determined to prove her devotion. She'd hold my hand in public, lean her head on my shoulder while we watched TV, whisper that she was thankful for a second chance. It was not a perfect redemption arc, but it was a real effort. At one counseling session, she looked me in the eye and said, "I'm choosing us every day, in every way I know how." I swallowed back tears and nodded. I was choosing us too, for better or worse. About a year after the discovery, we found ourselves stronger in some respects. The transparency forced by the affair ironically made us more aware of each other's emotional landscapes. She no longer kept quiet about her dissatisfaction. I no longer assumed we were automatically okay. Every now and then, the memory of those messages still surfaced, a phantom ache that reminded me how easily trust can be shattered. But the difference was that we faced it together rather than turning away. The journey forward wasn't all triumphant. There were days I'd wake up with the old bitterness, replaying her words about me being clueless. On those days, she'd sense my mood and gently coax me into talking. Sometimes I'd lash out, sometimes I'd break down sobbing, admitting I felt inadequate or foolish for missing the signs. She listened each time, offering no excuses, only apologies and reassurance of her present loyalty. Gradually, those triggers became less frequent, though never fully gone. Our final counseling session was a quiet affair. The counselor looked at us with a mixture of pride and caution. "You've come a long way," she said, "but trust is a living thing that needs constant tending. Keep communication open, always." We left feeling the weight of that truth. There was no neat fairy tale ending, no guarantee that we'd sail off into happily ever after without further storms. But we had tools now: honesty, accountability, and a renewed sense of what was at stake. Sometimes, I look at my wife and see the woman I first fell in love with at the coffee shop, the one who borrowed my pen and made me laugh with her quirky stories. Other times, I see the woman who lied to me for months and nearly broke my spirit. Reconciling those two images is a challenge I've accepted, for better or worse. And in her eyes, I see regret for what she did, but also a fierce desire to rebuild what she nearly destroyed. Not every relationship survives infidelity. Some might say I was a fool to stay, or that forgiveness on this level is impossible. But each marriage is its own universe, bound by invisible threads of shared history, love, pain, and hope. I chose to see if our universe could be salvaged. The road was painful and uncertain, but along the way, we found new depths to our bond. She let her walls down, and so did I, forging a connection that was more honest, if less innocent, than before. Now, years after that awful discovery, we still have moments where the past creeps in, casting a shadow. But we face it head-on, reminding each other of the promise to keep talking, to keep sharing, to never let resentments fester. We have nights where we laugh until our sides ache, days where we explore new corners of our city like tourists, mornings where we cook breakfast together, dancing to old pop songs in our pajamas. These are small victories, evidence that we've reclaimed some joy. That joy might be tinged with the knowledge of how fragile trust is, but it's also underscored by the resolve that we'll do everything in our power to protect what we've rebuilt. In the end, discovering her affair through those deleted messages shattered my world, but it also forced us to confront the cracks in our marriage we'd been ignoring. I'd never wish that kind of heartbreak on anyone, but for us, it became a catalyst, one that shook us to our core and demanded we either break apart or grow stronger. We chose the latter. The hurt didn't vanish with some magical gesture, but over time, replaced by a cautious yet determined commitment to each other. Our love now carries the weight of that heartbreak, but it also carries the resilience of two people who chose to stay, to fight, and to rediscover a connection that, though scarred, still shines with hope.